Hey there. Welcome back tonight. I'm going to tell you a story that'll make you think twice about those late-night subway rides. But before we dive into it, I want you to get comfortable. Grab your headphones and settle in. Trust me. This is one story you'll want to hear in full, especially with the sound of the city's underground echoing in your ears. Quick question for you. What would you do if you found yourself completely alone in a subway station late at night? I'm talking no people, no trains. Just you and the eerie hum of the flickering lights. Would you stay put? Or would you leave as fast as you could? Think about it and let me know in the comments below. All right. If you're ready to feel that creeping chill, let's get started. And if you got your own paranormal subway experience, share it with us. We're all here to be creeped out together. Now, let's get into the story. I've lived in New York City my whole life. So the subway is like a second home to me. You get used to it. Crowded platforms, the distant screech of a train, the way people pack into the cars like sardines. But there's something about the subway at night that feels different. If you've ever taken the last train, you know what I'm talking about. This story takes place just a few months ago. I was heading back home after a long day at work. I remember checking my phone. It was almost 1:30 a.m. I had just missed a train, which meant waiting alone on the platform for the next one. The station I was at was 23rd Street, on the Sea Line, not one of the more glamorous stations for sure. It always has this grimy, forgotten feel to it, especially that late at night. Now the thing is, the platform was completely empty. Not a single soul in sight. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was late after all. But after a few minutes, I started to notice how unnaturally quiet it was. The usual hum of distant trains, gone. The sound of rats scurrying through the tunnels, non-existent. All I could hear was the distant buzz of the flickering fluorescent lights overhead. I remember standing there, shifting my weight, feeling the weight of the silence pressing down on me. I kept glancing down the empty tunnel, awaiting for the next train to come into view. But nothing. Just a yawning black void. And as I stared into that darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was staring back. Have you ever had that feeling, like someone's watching you, even when you're alone? Let me know in the comments if you have. Because at that moment, I swear it felt like there was someone or something down there with me. After what felt like an eternity, I heard footsteps. Not from the direction I'd been expecting, where the trains usually came from, but behind me, back at the entrance to the station. At first, I was relieved. I mean, even the sight of another person can make you feel less alone in a place like that, right? I turned around, expecting to see someone coming down the stairs. Maybe another late-night commuter. But instead, there was just This is Amanda, standing at the far end of the platform. He was wearing a black coat, hands shoved deep into his pockets, his face hidden in shadow beneath the brim of his hat. I remember thinking it was odd that I hadn't heard him come in earlier. The stairs at this station creak like crazy. You can hear someone coming from a mile away. But there he was, standing perfectly still, facing me but not making any move to get closer. For a second, I considered calling out to him, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he just stood there, unmoving. Maybe it was the fact that I couldn't see his face at all, like he was intentionally staying in the shadows. My instinct screamed at me to stay put, so I didn't say a word. The strange part, the air in the station felt colder. You know how the subway can get unbearably hot during summer? It was one of those nights. But in that moment, I could feel a chill, like someone had opened a door to the winter outside. I checked the time again. Almost 2 a.m. Still no train. Now I'm curious. If you saw someone just standing there in a subway station, would you approach them? Or would you keep your distance? Let me know down below. I'm starting to wonder if my decision to stay silent was the right one. After what felt like hours of tension, I heard it, the low rumble of an approaching train. Finally. But as the train pulled into the station, something wasn't right. The headlights were dimmer than usual, flickering like the bulbs hadn't been replaced in years. The train itself looked old, not the usual modern cars you see on the Sea Line. This thing looked straight out of a different era, faded paint, grimy windows and the doors that screeched as they opened. No one got off, and as I peered into the windows, it didn't look like anyone was inside either, just empty, cold seats staring back at me. But the thing that really set me on edge, the man, he was gone. The spot where he'd been standing, empty. I hadn't seen him move, hadn't heard him leave. But he was nowhere to be found. I had a choice to make. Get on the train, this strange, decrepit train, or stay and wait for the next one. But what if this was the last train of the night? I didn't want to be stranded, especially not after everything I'd just experienced. Have you ever had that gut feeling that something is wrong, but you can't put your finger on it? That was me standing there, a heart pounding in my chest as the train doors creaked open. But against my better judgment, I stepped on. Once inside, the doors slammed shut with a force that made me jump. The train lurched forward, rattling down the tracks. There was no announcement, no map on the wall showing where the train was headed. I sat down, feeling every bump in the tracks reverberate through my body. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered in and out, plunging the car into near darkness every few seconds. I tried to calm myself. Told myself I'd be home soon. But that's when I realized something terrifying. The train wasn't stopping. It sped past station after station, each platform blurring by as the train picked up speed. I stood up, moving toward the door to see if I could find a way to signal the driver. But when I looked through the window into the next car, I froze. The man was there, standing completely still in the middle of the car, his back to me. He hadn't been there when I boarded. My blood turned to ice as I realized there was no way he could have gotten on after me. And yet there he was, as if he had been following me the entire time. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Stay put? Or confront him? Let me know, because I was paralyzed with fear, unable to do either. The train kept going, faster and faster, and the lights flickering more erratically. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the train screeched to a halt. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a station I'd never seen before. It wasn't listed on any map I'd ever checked. The walls were covered in grimy tiles, the kind that hadn't been cleaned in decades. There was no name on the platform, no signs, just the same eerie silence from earlier. I stepped off the train, heart hammering in my chest. The moment my feet hit the platform, the doors slammed shut behind me, and the train vanished into the dark tunnel. I was alone again. And that's when I heard it. A voice. Faint. Echoing through the empty station. Calling my name. So, what do you think? Would you have gotten on that train? Or stayed put on the platform? And what do you think was waiting for me in that nameless station? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story spine-chilling, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that'll keep you up at night. And trust me, the next one, it's going to be even scarier. Have a subway story of your own. Share it with me. And who knows? Maybe your story will be the next one we dive into. See you next time. If you make it back from your next subway ride. You'd think after that night I'd avoid the subway altogether, but life in New York doesn't give you that option. A few weeks later I found myself back underground, though this time I wasn't heading home from work. No, this time was different. This was supposed to be a simple late-night meet-up with some friends on the L train. I was running late, and I decided to take a shortcut, one I've never taken before. It was just after midnight, and I remember pulling up a subway app on my phone, scanning for the quickest route. That's when I saw it, Bedford Avenue. Now, Bedford Avenue isn't exactly a strange station. If you've been on the L train, you know it's one of the busiest stops in Brooklyn. But what caught my eye was something weird. A nearby station I didn't recognize. Wythe Station, it said. I know the area well enough, and that name had never come up before. The app showed it was just a block from Bedford, so I figured, why not try it? I arrived at Bedford, the usual crowd of hipsters and night owls thinning out as I made my way to the surface. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. the streets felt quieter. Too quiet for Williamsburg at this time of night. Even the distant hum of traffic seemed muted. And then I saw it, the entrance to Wythe Station. It looked like it had been there forever, but the worn, almost forgotten look didn't match the shiny new renovations that had swept through the area. The cracked tile, faded signage, and rusting metal turnstiles looked out of place. I checked my app again. Wythe Station was still listed, but something about it felt wrong. I thought about turning around, catching the L train like I originally planned, but my curiosity got the better of me. Have you ever taken a wrong turn and just known you shouldn't have? That gut feeling that tells you to go back, but you don't? Yeah, that was me. I ignored it. The stairs leading down into the station were narrow, much older than any other subway entrance I'd seen in the city. There was this odd metallic smell hanging in the air, like old pennies and damp concrete. The fluorescent lights flickered above me. Just like in those horror movies you regret watching late at night. Still, I kept going. As I descended, the noise of the city above faded, replaced by an eerie silence. The platform at Wythe Station was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was long and narrow, with a single set of tracks running down the middle. But there were no advertisements, no signs, just bare yellowed tile and a bench in the distance. And the smell, it got stronger the further I went. Like rust and something rotten. I checked the time. 12:15 a.m. I figured if the train didn't come in the next few minutes, I'd head back up and walk the rest of the way. But when I glanced down the tunnel, the darkness stretched on forever, and that's when I noticed the worst part. There were no other passengers. Not one. Just me. Have you ever been the only person waiting for a train? Even if it's empty, there's usually some sign of life, a distant voice. Footsteps. Something. But not here. I was completely alone, and the silence was deafening. I stood there, staring into the empty tracks, the stillness creeping under my skin. And then I heard it. Not a train. Not footsteps, but breathing. The breathing was soft at first, almost like a breeze, but it was unmistakably human. My heart skipped a beat. It was coming from behind me. Slowly I turned around, half expecting to see someone. Anyone. But there was nothing, just the same empty platform stretching out into the dark. I scanned the area, my eyes locking onto the old bench at the far end of the platform. That's when I saw him. There was a man sitting there, head down, shoulders hunched, like he'd been waiting for hours. His clothes were dirty, almost shredded, and his hair hung over his face in greasy clumps. But what really unnerved me was his stillness. He wasn't moving, not even slightly. And yet the breathing continued. I thought about going up to him, maybe asking if he knew when the next train was coming. But something in my gut stopped me. There was no way he could be breathing that loudly from where he was sitting. but it was as if the sound was coming from all around me. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have walked up to him? Or turned around and left? Let me know, because every instinct in my body told me to run, but I was frozen in place. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. I couldn't tell anymore. The sound of breathing never stopped. I checked my phone again, but the screen was stuck on 12:15 a.m. No signal. No time change. Just stuck. That's when the lights above me flickered, and for the briefest second, the man on the bench lifted his head. I froze. His face, if you could call it that, was a pale, hollow mask of stretched skin and wide, unblinking eyes. His mouth was slightly open, but no words came out. Just the breathing. Deep, ragged, and impossibly close. His gaze locked onto mine, and I could feel my blood turn cold. I don't know if it was fear or instinct, but I turned on my heel and ran for the stairs. As I did do, the lights overhead began to sputter out one by one, plunging the platform into darkness. Behind me, I could hear the shuffle of footsteps. Slow at first, then faster, like something was chasing me. When I reached the top of the stairs, I slammed into the turnstile and shoved my way through. I was panting, my heart thundering in my chest, and as I reached the street, I heard it, the distant sound of a train pulling into the station. But I wasn't about to go back and check. No way. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't stop thinking about the station, the man, and that breathing. I tried to look up Wythe Station the next day, but there was nothing. No mention of it online. No maps showing its location. It was like the place didn't exist. And here's the thing. I've gone back to Bedford Avenue since then. A dozen times, in fact. But I've never seen that entrance again. It's like it vanished into thin air. Every now and then, though, late at night when I'm on the train, I'll pass by an unfamiliar platform, just for a second, and I'll see it. That same man, sitting there, waiting. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed. If I'd waited for the train. Would it have taken me somewhere? Or would I have never come back? Have you ever come across a subway station that wasn't supposed to be there? Or had an encounter underground that left you with more questions than answers? I want to hear your stories in the comments. If you've got a theory about Wythe Station, or if you think it's still out there. Let's talk about it. And don't worry. There's plenty more where this came from. Let's just hope the next station we stop at isn't one that shouldn't exist. Transition line. After the whole ordeal with Wythe Station, I tried my best to avoid taking the subway late at night. But as anyone who lives in New York can tell you, sometimes you don't have a choice. It was a Thursday night, barely a week later. I'd been out with some friends in Chinatown, and I was exhausted, looking forward to nothing more than crashing in bed. The night had crept past midnight again, and I found myself standing on the platform at Canal Street, waiting for the J train. Now the J line? It's not exactly the most comfortable route in the city. It's older, creakier, and always feels like it's on the verge of falling apart. But something about that night felt particularly off. The platform was nearly deserted except for one or two people. Far down at the other end, standing under the flickering lights. I checked the time on my phone, 12:42 a.m. The train should have been there already. But the delay didn't bother me as much as the stillness in the air. Canal Street is usually bustling, even at night, with the echoes of the city reaching down into the tunnels. But tonight, there was nothing. Just a weird, oppressive quiet that seemed to wrap itself around me. Eventually, I heard the train approaching. The screech of metal on metal. When the doors slid open, I hesitated. There was something unsettling about the car in front of me. The windows were unusually dark, reflecting only my own anxious face. Still, I stepped inside. The car was completely empty. Have you ever been in a subway car by yourself? It's supposed to feel like a relief, no crowds, no noise, just peace. But instead, it felt like I'd walked into some forgotten pocket of the city, a place where no one was supposed to be. I took a seat near the middle, close to the doors. The train started moving. But something was wrong. There was no familiar hum of the subway motor. No rhythmic clacking of the wheels. It was like the car was gliding through a vacuum. I glanced at the doors leading to the next car, wondering if I should move. But the longer I sat there, the heavier the air became. It was like the silence was pressing down on me, filling every corner of the car. Then I noticed it, the advertisements above the windows. They were all blank. No posters. No ads for Broadway shows. No PSA warnings. Just empty. White space. Have you ever noticed something small? Something trivial that just didn't seem right? That was my moment. That blank space was gnawing at me, whispering that something was wrong. But I couldn't figure out what. The train kept moving, but the windows showed nothing but darkness outside. No stations. No lights flashing by, just the deep black of the tunnels. I checked my phone again. 12:50 a.m. No service, of course. That's when I heard it. The faintest shuffle of movement behind me. I whipped around, expecting to see someone, but the car was still empty. No one had boarded at the last stop, and the doors hadn't opened since I got on. I scanned the seats, but there was nothing out of place. Then I noticed something in the reflection of the window across from me. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable. But there, in the reflection, was a figure sitting at the far end of the car. A man, his head slightly bowed, his shoulders hunched forward like he was dozing off. The strange part was, when I turned back to look at the seats directly, there was no one there. I stared hard, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no matter how I angled myself, the reflection stayed the same. He was there, plain as day in the glass, but missing in the flesh. He wore a dark hoodie, his face obscured by the shadows cast by his hood. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have called out, or just kept your distance? Because I can tell you right now, I wasn't about to find out who or what that was. The train didn't slow down. It just kept barreling forward, skipping every station I knew should have come up by now. Delancey Street, Bowery, Essex Street, none of them appeared. The reflection of the man in the window was still there, unmoving, but now it felt like he was staring directly at me. Even with his face hidden, the panic started creeping in. I kept glancing at the emergency exit signs, the maps, anything that could give me some sense of normalcy. But the walls of the car seemed bare. No station names, no markers. Just the endless stretch of tunnel in the windows. I reached for my phone again, 12:59 a.m., but there was no signal. Nothing. Like I was cut off from the world entirely. Then the train suddenly jerked, throwing me against the seat. The lights overhead flickered once, twice, and then went out, plunging the car into pitch-black darkness. My heart was pounding in my ears, the only sound left in that suffocating silence. And in the reflection, I could still see the man. His face, his empty, featureless face, staring right at me. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in short gasps. I wanted to move to another car, to get out of that one as fast as I could. But I couldn't move. My body felt paralyzed, rooted to the spot by some unseen force. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the train lurched to a stop. The lights flickered back on, and I was thrown forward as the car came to a sudden screeching halt. But it wasn't at a station. The doors slid open, revealing nothing but an empty platform. No signs, no people, just cracked tiles and a dim light hanging from the ceiling. I staggered toward the open doors, desperate to get off, to get away from whatever was in that car. But as I approached the exit, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A man standing at the far end of the platform near the conductor's booth. His back was turned to me, dressed in a subway conductor's uniform. I called out to him, relieved that there was anyone there who could help. But he didn't move. Didn't even acknowledge me. He just stood there, staring at the tracks in front of him. Have you ever tried to get someone's attention only to feel like they're deliberately ignoring you? That's exactly how it felt. My skin was crawling. I wanted to run, but I couldn't just leave without trying again. I stepped closer, my voice shaking as I called out again. Sir? Is everything okay? Finally he moved. Slowly. His head turned, but when I saw his face, I wished I hadn't called out at all. His eyes were hollow, wide, and staring. His skin was ashen, stretched tight over his skull. And his mouth hung open in a grotesque frozen scream, as if he'd been trapped that way for years. Before I could even react, the train's doors slammed shut behind me. The lights flickered violently and the train shot forward, leaving me stranded on the platform. But that wasn't the worst part. As the train pulled away, I glanced at the windows and saw them, rows of faces. Pale and motionless, pressed against the glass. All staring at me as the train disappeared into the tunnel. I spun around, hoping to find another exit, another way out, but the platform stretched endlessly in both directions. There were no stairs, no turnstiles, just an infinite platform with flickering lights. And I wasn't alone. The conductor was gone, but I could feel eyes on me, dozens, maybe hundreds. I turned slowly, and that's when I saw them. The passengers lining the edges of the platform, faces blank and eyes wide. They were watching me, silent and unmoving. I backed away, my heart racing, unsure where to go or what to do. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the silence shattered. A distant screech echoed from the tunnel, the sound of an approaching train. But this time I knew. I knew whatever was on that train wasn't human. Have you ever felt like you've seen something on a subway that wasn't supposed to be there? Something that felt wrong? Let me know in the comments below if you've ever experienced something similar. And let's talk about it. Because sometimes the scariest things aren't what we imagine. They're what we see in plain sight. And trust me, there's always another story waiting. The next time you step on a train late at night, just make sure you're the only passenger.